40 fighters, not 12. Someone in an American uniform changed that number in cold blood, crossed out 40, typed 12, hit send, went home and slept without a problem. 12 Navy SEALs walked straight into the trap before sunrise. 40 armed fighters were already waiting. Rock walls on both sides. No air support. No way out. 2 men down in the first 60 seconds. Then the radio crackled on an emergency frequency. A woman's voice. Calm. Precise. I've been watching them for 48 hours. I count 40. Give me authorization and I'll give you a way out. One by one, she started dropping them. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that mountain. The rain started 3 hours before the SEALs ever touched the island. It came down in long, cold sheets across San Esteban, the kind of rain that soaks through every layer you're wearing before you've taken 10 steps. The kind that turns rock surfaces into mirrors and fills every low channel with fast-moving water. The kind that makes experienced operators check their footing twice before they move. Commander Cole Bennett checked his footing constantly. I was 41 years old, 15 years in the teams, and he had been in enough bad situations to know the difference between a mission that felt difficult and a mission that felt wrong. San Esteban felt wrong in a way he couldn't fully explain to himself, let alone to the 11 men following him through the darkness. But the intelligence was solid, or so everyone above his pay grade kept telling him. 12 fighters, lightly armed, positioned inside an aging radar facility at the mountain's eastern face. 5 civilian engineers taken hostage 4 days ago, all of them still alive according to the last confirmed signal. 12 fighters. The number sat in his chest like a stone. He moved it around in his mind while he led Trident 1 through the pre-dawn darkness and down into a dry volcanic drainage channel that cut through the base of the ridge like an old wound in the earth. The channel offered concealment from the facility's sensor equipment. It was the cleanest infiltration route on the map. Command had highlighted it in yellow and called it the preferred approach. Bennett called it a hallway. Stack tight, he said over the team, channel his voice barely above the sound of the rain. 60 meters to the first bend. Pace yourselves. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Hayes moved up alongside him without being asked. Hayes was the kind of man who anticipated needs before they were spoken. 38 years old, built like someone had assembled him specifically for uncomfortable terrain, and wearing an expression that Bennett recognized as controlled worry. You feeling this? Hayes asked quietly. Yeah, Bennett said. What specifically? Bennett glanced at him. The silence. Hayes understood immediately. He turned and scanned the ridge above the channel's walls without slowing his pace. The ridge was dark. Nothing moved. There were no birds, no insects, nothing that belonged to a living environment. Just rain and rock and a quality of stillness that felt manufactured. I'll put Rodriguez and Park on rear security, Hayes said. Do it. The team adjusted without breaking stride. That was the thing about men who had worked together long enough that decisions didn't require lengthy explanations. A look, a word, sometimes just a hand signal was enough. Trident 1 had been together for 3 years. They functioned like a single organism with 12 separate nervous systems. Petty Officer Luke Barrett was directly behind Bennett, carrying the team's medical kit in addition to his own load. Barrett was 26, the youngest man on the team by 4 years, and he had a habit of humming very softly under his breath when his adrenaline climbed. Bennett could hear him doing it now. He didn't ask him to stop. It helped him gauge Barrett's state of mind, and right now Barrett's mind was alert but not panicked. That was about to change. They were 40 meters into the channel, moving steadily through standing water that reached their ankles when the first charge detonated behind them. The sound was enormous, not the sharp crack of a rifle or even the heavy thump of a grenade, but the kind of full-consuming explosion that you feel in your teeth, in your chest, before your brain fully registers what your ears just heard. Rock and debris cascaded down the walls of the channel. The rear of the column was knocked sideways. Rodriguez hit the wall hard and stayed on one knee for a moment, shaking his head like a man trying to clear water from his ears. Contact rear. Park's voice came through the radio with a distortion that meant his earpiece had partially failed. Charges they dropped, the entrance behind us. We are sealed in. Bennett didn't stop moving forward. There was nothing forward that was worse than what was behind them. He grabbed Hayes by the shoulder and pushed him toward the right wall. Cover high right, now! The second and third charges came from the sides. Not explosions this time, shaped charges built into cracks in the channel walls designed to destroy footholds rather than kill directly. The message was clear and deliberate. Whoever set this had studied the terrain. They knew the channel. They knew the team would use it. They had been waiting. Contact high left. That was Vasquez, the team's senior breacher. His voice strained but controlled. Machine gun, I count 2 positions northeast and northwest. The firing began in a sustained, overlapping pattern that told Bennett these weren't panicked fighters responding to discovery. They were disciplined operators who had rehearsed this. The fire came from above and angled downward using the channel walls to eliminate cover. The seals were between stone surfaces on both sides with no roof above them and no ground-level cover worth mentioning. Barrett grabbed Bennett's arm and pulled him sideways as a burst of fire walked down the rock face beside them. Sir Barrett's hit. That was Morales, the medic, already moving. I'm fine, Barrett said, his voice tight. Arm, it's the arm, keep moving. Stay down. Morales pulled him against the wall and worked fast, his hands moving by feel in the dark. Through and through muscle tissue, you'll live, but you need to stay. I said I'm fine, Barrett said again, but this time he didn't move to get up. Bennett pressed himself against the western wall and tried to think. He called for air support and got the answer he'd already expected. The clouds above San Esteban were sitting at roughly 400 feet with gusts in the Channel Valley exceeding 60 knots. No fixed wing, no rotary wing, nothing was flying tonight. The nearest ground asset was a Coast Guard tactical unit staged 40 minutes to the south by sea, and the sea was currently not cooperating. 12 fighters, the intelligence said. He could count at least 6 separate firing positions from where he crouched, and he could see muzzle flashes from 2 more on the far ridge. 8 confirmed. The sustained volume of fire suggested more. Much more. Hayes crawled to his side, moving with his face close to the rock. I make at least 4 machine gun teams, 2 more on the far wall, and there's something moving on the southern approach, a flanking group, maybe 6 men. How long do we have? Hayes looked at the channel walls, at the angle of the incoming fire, at the distance between their position and the nearest covered exit. He did the math, and his expression told Bennett the answer before he spoke it. 6 minutes, maybe 8 if we get lucky. We need to get Barrett and Hernandez to cover. Hernandez, how bad? Morales answered for him. Fragment in his thigh. He can move, but not fast, not independently. Bennett looked at the walls above him. The enemy had the high ground. They had rehearsed this. They had destroyed the exit behind the team. They had a flanking element moving on the south. In 6 minutes, that flanking element would be inside effective range and firing downward from an angle that would eliminate the last pieces of cover the team had. I was calculating acceptable losses, something he had promised himself long ago. He would never do when the radio crackled on a frequency he didn't recognize. The voice that came through was a woman's voice, calm, precise, speaking quickly but without any trace of panic. Trident 1, this is call sign Watchman. I have been observing your position for the last 90 seconds. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Bennett stared at his radio like it had said something in a language he didn't speak. Who is this? He demanded. My name is Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan. I am a reconnaissance sniper assigned to Task Force Meridian. I have been on Falcon Ridge for 48 hours. I am transmitting on your emergency frequency because I need you to respond before that flanking element reaches the southern lip. You have approximately 4 minutes. Commander, please respond. Hayes was already looking at Bennett with an expression that said exactly what Bennett was thinking. This could be a deception. An enemy operator with a captured radio and a female voice designed to create confusion or draw them into a worse position. Watchman, Bennett said carefully, prove you're watching us right now. What am I looking at? There was a pause of exactly 2 seconds. You are crouched against the western wall of the drainage channel, approximately 38 meters from the block's southern entrance. Your medic is working on a leg wound on a man to your immediate right. The man with the arm wound is on one knee to his left, and he is still holding his weapon. There are 2 more operators at the northern bend who have not yet been able to advance because of the machine gun position at your 2 o'clock. The flanking group coming from the south is currently passing the second antenna tower. They are 6 men. They are moving faster than you think. Bennett felt something settle in his chest. Not quite relief, because relief wasn't available yet, but a recalibration. She was real. She was watching. She had been watching long enough to know the details. Donovan, he said, what are we dealing with, True Count? Another brief pause. He understood she was calculating what he needed to hear versus what he could functionally use. 37 to 39 active fighters. I have been tracking them for 2 days. My transmissions were delayed by a relay failure, or I would have warned you before you entered the channel. The intelligence report you were given was altered. Whoever prepared your brief reduced the enemy strength by more than 2/3. The words landed like a second explosion. Bennett looked at Hayes. Hayes closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them and looked at the ridge above them. Altered. Someone had altered the report. Right now, Bennett said, forcing himself back into the present moment, because the future of that particular piece of information would have to wait. Can you engage from your position? I have a clean line on the Northeast machine gun team and one of the radio coordinators. I also have a sight on the Southern flanking group. I have been under strict orders to observe only. I am not attached to your element. My position must remain concealed so that I can identify the cell's senior coordinator. She paused. But if I do not engage in the next 3 minutes, your team will not survive the next 8. The silence that followed was perhaps 4 seconds long. 4 seconds in which Bennett heard the sustained rattle of enemy fire, heard Morales speaking quietly to Hernandez, heard Barrett's controlled breathing, heard Hayes shifting his weight against the wall. 4 seconds in which he thought about the word orders and what it actually meant when applied to a situation that the people who wrote those orders had never envisioned. Donovan, he said. Yes, Commander. You have authorization. Give us a way out. The next sound was not from the enemy. It was a single rifle shot that traveled 760 meters through rain-soaked air and arrived at the Northeast machine gun position with the kind of silence that follows an answer to a question everyone was afraid to ask. The gun stopped firing. Just stopped. Mid-burst. Hayes looked at Bennett. That, Hayes said quietly, was not a lucky shot. The enemy understood that too, which was immediately obvious from the change in their behavior. The sustained, confident volume of fire fractured. Voices, Bennett could hear them even through the rain, called out in sharp, urgent tones. The flanking group to the south stopped advancing. Fighters on the ridge began scanning their own flanks instead of focusing their fire downward. They did not know where the shot had come from. That moment of confusion, 5 seconds, maybe 6, was not much. But it was enough for Bennett to think one level ahead. Hayes, get Barrett and Hernandez moving. Northern Bend, now. Moving. Vasquez, Rodriguez Park, leapfrog north. Cover each other. Copy. Morales, you're with me on the rear. It wasn't an escape, not yet. The channel still had 3 active firing positions capable of cutting the team apart. The flanking group was hesitating, but not gone. The exit to the north opened into elevated terrain with no pre-planned cover. But it was movement, and movement was better than waiting to be surrounded. Watchman Trident 1 is moving north. What do you see? Claire's voice came back immediately. West Ridge position is scanning. Do not move. Yet, wait. A pause of exactly 3 seconds. Northwest gun team is traversing left. You have a window. Move now. Bennett moved. The team pushed north through the channel in a fast, low movement that covered 20 meters in less than 30 seconds. A burst of fire came from the eastern wall, but it was reactionary and poorly aimed. The shooter had heard movement rather than seen it. The round sparked off stone 3 meters to the right of the column and then stopped. Barrett was moving. Both legs, one arm pressed against his body. He wasn't making noise about the arm anymore. He was focused on keeping up with the man in front of him, and he was doing it. Then the second shot came. It was different from the first, a slightly longer interval between the moment of expected danger and the moment of resolution, which told Bennett that Claire had needed to shift position before firing. She was moving. She was exposing herself to reposition for the team's benefit. The Western Ridge position went silent. A third shot, rapid this time, took apart something electronic on the south slope, a communication device or portable command unit, based on the way the enemy's coordination suddenly degraded. The voices calling out to each other across the ridges became reactive rather than directional. For the first time since the ambush began, Bennett heard something he had almost stopped expecting. Quiet. Not silence, not safety, but a version of the tactical environment, where his team was reacting one step behind the enemy's confusion rather than 10 steps behind the enemy's plan. Hayes appeared at his left shoulder. Northeast team is down. I make 2 active positions remaining on the ridge proper. Flanking element has broken into cover. They don't know where the shots came from. Where's Watchman? Hayes shook his head. I can't locate her. That was precisely the point. If Hayes couldn't find her, the enemy couldn't either. Watchman, Bennett said into the radio, sound off. A pause, longer than before. Long enough that Bennett felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the rain. Then still here, changed position. I took some fire on the ridge. They're searching the upper face now. I have eyes on a maintenance passage, approximately 60 meters north of your current position, right side of the channel wall. Iron grate partially buried. It connects to the old tunnel system under the radar facility. Bennett looked at Hayes. Hayes was already looking at him. That's not on our map, Bennett said. No, Claire said. It wouldn't be. The maps your team is using are from a survey done 11 years ago. This passage was cut 4 years later during a facility upgrade. I found it in the original engineering records during my prep. I can guide you to it, but you need to move in the next 90 seconds before the flanking group repositions. There was no hesitation this time. Talk us in, Bennett said. 15 meters north, then look right. There's a rock formation that looks like a wedge, 2 large stones leaning together. The grate is at the base, partially covered with soil runoff. Vasquez can open it. Vasquez was already moving before Bennett finished relaying the instruction. He was the breacher. Opening things was what he did. Barrett was alongside Bennett now, close enough to speak without the radio. Who is she? He asked quietly. Reconnaissance sniper. Task Force Meridian. She's been up on that ridge for 2 days watching us walk into this. Barrett absorbed that. Then, she alone, as far as I know. Barrett looked up at the dark ridge above them. The rain-soaked rock face where somewhere crawling through her own concealed position, a woman he had never met was making it possible for him to still be breathing. Huh, he said. It wasn't much of a response, but coming from Barrett, who was 26 years old, still carrying his weapon, still moving despite a hole in his arm, it carried the weight of something that didn't require more words. Vasquez's voice came over the channel. Found it. Grates corroded, but the hinge is intact. 30 seconds. Watchman, Bennett said. We're at the passage. What's your read on the enemy? Can we get everyone through before they reestablish? Flanking group has stopped in cover approximately 30 meters south of your entry point. The 2 ridge positions are still active, but they are covering the north end of the channel, not the wall itself. You have a window, but it is closing. Get the wounded in first. Copy. Bennett turned to Morales and Hayes. Barrett and Hernandez first, then the rest in pairs. Vasquez, your last reseal the grate from the inside if it's possible. On it. It took 4 minutes to move 12 men through a gap in the rock that was barely wide enough for one person with gear. 4 minutes in which the rain continued. The enemy continued to search the ridgeline for a sniper they couldn't locate, and Barrett dropped into the tunnel without complaint, despite the fact that climbing through a narrow iron-framed opening with a hole in your arm is something that belongs in a category of pain that most people never have to catalog. I went first because he was told to. He didn't argue. When the last man was through and Vasquez had pulled the grate back into position, Bennett crouched in the tunnel's darkness and listened to the silence above him. No shouts, no boots on rock. No one had seen them enter. He clicked his radio twice. Watchmen, we're inside, all 12, 2 walking wounded. Claire's voice came back in the same even tone she had maintained throughout, controlled, precise, no performance in it. But this time there was something at the edges that hadn't been there before. Not relief exactly, something quieter than that. Understood, Trident 1. Glad you made it. Hayes was looking at Bennett. His expression was one that Bennett had rarely seen on Hayes in 3 years, something that crossed the line between respect and something closer to genuine awe. She did that from 760 meters, Hayes said quietly, in the rain, under fire, while changing positions. Yeah, Bennett said. Who is she? Bennett thought about the voice on the radio, the way she had said, your team will not survive the next 8 minutes, without any attempt to soften it. The way she had said, I'm still here, after a pause long enough that he'd already started preparing for a worse answer. The way she had known about the maintenance passage from an engineering record that wasn't on the team's tactical map. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I'm going to find out. Above them, somewhere on the wet rock face of Falcon Ridge, in a position that no one on the enemy side had been able to locate despite directing sustained fire in its general direction, Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan was already crawling to her next observation point. She had been awake for 51 hours. She had eaten 1 meal in 2 days. Her hands were bleeding from where the rock had opened the skin during her last position change. And she was not done yet, not even close. She settled her scope, found the main courtyard of the facility below, and began counting threats again. Methodical, patient, precise. Because 12 Americans were now underground with 2 wounded men, no exit on their maps, and no idea that the worst part of this night hadn't started yet. She knew. She had watched the additional fighters arriving before sunset, not 12, not 20, closer to 40. She had watched them set up the ambush with the careful efficiency of people who had been told exactly where the Americans would be. She had watched the senior coordinator, the man she had been specifically ordered to identify, move from the eastern building into the underground complex just before the ambush was triggered. She had not yet taken a shot at him, because Claire Donovan understood something that not every shooter understood, that the most important decisions in a firefight are almost never about when to pull the trigger. They are about when not to. She pressed her eye back to the scope, counted, breathed, and waited for Bennett to call her again. He would. She was certain of it. The rain came down harder. Somewhere below the ridge, the storm that had been building over the Pacific for 4 days was finally fully arriving. She could feel it in the air pressure, in the temperature drop, in the way the wind had changed direction twice in the last 20 minutes. The storm would make everything harder for the enemy, for the SEALs, and for her. But Claire Donovan had spent the better part of 12 years learning how to operate in conditions that made things harder. She had learned it the hard way, the only way it actually stuck. And tonight, on a rain-soaked ridge above a facility full of armed men who wanted 12 Americans dead, every single one of those hard lessons was about to be tested in ways that nobody's training ever fully prepares you for. She clicked her radio once, a brief, deliberate signal. "I'm still here." Bennett clicked back twice. "We hear you." She exhaled slowly and returned her attention to the courtyard below. 40-something fighters, 5 hostages somewhere in that underground complex, a storm arriving in force, a compromised intelligence network with a leak that led somewhere inside an American base, and 12 men underground who 2 hours ago hadn't known she existed. Now their lives depended on her staying invisible, staying conscious, and staying accurate. She had done harder things. She told herself that clearly, without any drama. Then she settled in, controlled her breathing, and got back to work. The tunnel smelled like 40 years of standing water and rust. Bennett moved through it, crouched, one hand on the wall, counting his steps out of habit, because counting was something to do when your mind was trying to process things. It hadn't been built to process at speed. Behind him, 12 men moved in near silence, the kind of silence that professionals maintain, not because they are calm, but because they have trained the noise out of their fear until only the discipline remains. Barrett was 2 steps behind him. He could hear it in the breathing, slightly shallow, controlled by will rather than comfort. The arm wound wasn't going to kill him, but it was talking to him. It was talking to him constantly. "How you doing?" Bennett said quietly, not looking back. "Still mad about it," Barrett said. That was enough. That was Barrett's version of fine. Hayes moved up alongside Bennett in the tunnel, ducking under a low section of ceiling that hadn't been engineered for men wearing body armor. His voice was barely audible. "Command is not going to like that we're below ground and off the planned route. Command also told us there were 12 fighters," Bennett said. Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Fair point. When we get to a position where I can transmit clearly, I'll update them. Right now, I need to know what's in front of us before I worry about what's behind us." As if on cue, Claire's voice came through the radio, still measured, still precise, but this time carrying something underneath the precision that hadn't been there in the first transmission. Not urgency, something more specific than that. The quality of a person who has just seen something that changes the calculation. "Trident 1 Watchman, I need to update you on what I'm observing." "Go ahead, Watchman." "The 5 hostages have been moved. Approximately 11 minutes ago, before the ambush triggered, 6 fighters transferred them from the eastern holding block into the underground control complex. There is a secondary reinforced entrance on the north side of the facility. They are no longer in the location your briefing identified, I am sorry I transmitted this update 6 hours ago, but I cannot confirm it was received. The silence in the tunnel lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Vasquez from the back of the column said what everyone was already thinking. Of course they moved them. Bennett stopped walking. The column stopped with him, each man reading the body language of the man in front, a skill you developed over years of working in the dark with people whose lives you were responsible for. He pressed his back against the tunnel wall and brought the radio up. Watchmen confirmed the hostages are underground in the control complex. Confirmed. The complex has at least 2 levels. The lower level is where they stored the communications equipment that was taken from the relay station. I believe that is also where the hostages are being held now, based on the movement pattern I observed. Bennett looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at the tunnel ceiling for a moment, then back at Bennett. The unspoken conversation between them took about 4 seconds and covered approximately 15 decisions. What's the status of the control complex entrance? Bennett asked. The north entrance is guarded by 4 men. There is also a secondary ventilation access on the western face of the mountain that is not guarded. It is not on your maps because it was part of the same upgrade project as the maintenance passage. It is narrow, approximately 60 centimeters wide for a stretch of about 4 meters before it opens into a larger shaft. A man in full kit would need to strip to get through. 10 you mark it. I can give you compass, bearing, and distance. But Commander, there is something else you need to know right now, and I need you to hear it clearly. Bennett straightened slightly. In his experience, when someone with Claire's composure specifically asked you to hear something clearly, the thing they were about to say was something you were not going to want to hear. Go ahead. Chief Hayes needs to check your communications log from the last 6 hours, not your operational transmissions, the routing metadata on your command uplink. I intercepted a coordination signal from inside the complex approximately 40 minutes ago. It was formatted using an American military encryption template, not a captured template, a current one. Whoever gave the enemy your infiltration route had access to your team's assigned frequency range and your approach timing. This was not a general leak. This was targeted. The tunnel felt smaller suddenly. Not physically, nothing had changed, but in the way that certain information contracts the available space in a room regardless of its actual dimensions. Hayes was already pulling out the secondary communications unit, the one they carried specifically for deep verification checks. The kind of equipment that most teams never needed to use because most operations didn't involve this particular category of problem. Someone inside our network, Bennett said. Not a question. Someone with access to your mission, brief, your route assignment, and your team's radio architecture, Claire said. Yes, I cannot tell you from here who it is, but I can tell you that the ambush was designed for exactly 12 men moving through exactly that channel at exactly the time you entered it. The charges were pre-positioned. The firing teams were staged before your insertion began. Barrett had moved up quietly and was standing just behind Bennett, now close enough to hear. When Bennett glanced at him, Barrett's expression had changed. The controlled focus was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Something that Barrett didn't usually let show. They knew we were coming, Barrett said quietly. They planned the welcome, Bennett said. Hayes' voice cut in from 3 steps back, low and sharp. Commander, you need to look at this. Bennett moved back through the column to where Hayes was crouching with the secondary unit open. The screen showed a routing log, dry technical, the kind of information that most people in the building would have walked past without a second glance. But Hayes was pointing at a timestamp and a routing flag. And once Bennett saw what Hayes was pointing at, he understood why Claire's transmission had arrived on an emergency frequency rather than going through standard channels. The mission brief had been accessed and modified 14 hours before Trident 1 inserted. The modification was small, single field in the enemy strength estimate, changed from 39 to 12. The access credentials used to make the change belonged to an intelligence officer stationed at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam. The modification had been flagged by an automated system. The flag had been manually cleared by the same credentials 40 minutes later. Someone cleared their own flag, Hayes said. To buy time, Bennett said, to make sure we were already in the channel before anyone noticed. Bennett stood up and walked back to the front of the column. He needed to keep moving because the tunnel wasn't safe as a stationary position. The hostages were underground in a facility above them. The storm was arriving, and somewhere on the ridge above him, a woman with bleeding hands and 48 hours of no sleep was the only set of eyes he had on the surface. He keyed the radio, watchman bearing and distance to the ventilation access. 273 degrees from your current tunnel position. Distance from the point where the maintenance tunnel intersects the lower equipment chamber, approximately 90 meters. You will hear it before you see it. There is airflow coming down from the storm. Copy. Can you maintain eyes on the facility while we move? A pause, shorter than he expected. I need to reposition. The ridge search is getting closer. I have to move west about 200 meters to maintain line of sight on the courtyard and the north entrance simultaneously. It will take me approximately 8 minutes. I will go quiet during the move. Bennett did not like 8 minutes of silence. 8 minutes was a long time underground with wounded men and no surface picture. Donovan, he said, and he was aware that he had shifted from her call sign to her name without deciding to, how are you doing up there, honestly? Another pause. This one had a different quality, not tactical calculation, but something more personal. The pause of someone who has been asked a question they weren't prepared for. I've had better nights, she said, but I've had worse ones too. Keep moving, Commander. I'll be back on net in 8. The radio went quiet. Hayes appeared at his shoulder again. She's been up there 2 days alone. I know. That's not a support role. That's not what they told her she was doing. I know that too, Bennett said. Keep moving. The column pushed forward through the tunnel. Morales was working on Hernandez while they moved a skill in itself, maintaining medical care during tactical movement. Something that looked easy from the outside and is in fact one of the hardest things a combat medic learns to do. He was talking quietly to Hernandez, the whole time the kind of constant low murmur that keeps a wounded man connected to the present moment rather than drifting toward the warm, dangerous edges of shock. You still with me, Morales said. Still annoyed at you, Hernandez said. Good. Stay annoyed. It keeps the blood pressure up. Barrett had moved to the middle of the column, which was where Bennett had put him, not at the back where the strain of keeping up would isolate him, and not at the front where he might push past his limits trying to prove something. The middle, where he could set his own pace without feeling watched. I was humming again. Very quietly, almost below the threshold of hearing. Bennett found the intersection with the lower equipment chamber by feel as much as by sight, a widening in the tunnel, a change in the sound quality, the faint movement of air that Claire had promised. He held up a fist and the column stopped. He counted the column. 12 men. Good. 12. Watchman is repositioning, he said quietly to Hayes. We wait here for contact from her before we move into the chamber. Hayes nodded. What did you want to do about the intelligence issue Command needs to know? Command needs to know a lot of things, Bennett said. But right now, I'm not transmitting our position to anyone until I know the full scope of the leak. If someone at Pearl Harbor had access to this mission brief, I don't know who else on the chain might be watching our communications. Hayes considered that. So we're dark. We're dark. 12 men, 2 wounded, underground, storm incoming, no air support, no reinforcement within 40 minutes. And one observer on the surface who's been awake for 2 days and knows more about this facility than anyone in our intelligence chain, Bennett said. Yeah, that's what we have. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Bennett hadn't heard him say in 3 years of working together. I'm glad she's there. So am I, Bennett said. The radio clicked twice. Claire was back on net. Right at 8 minutes, not a second over. Trident 1 watchman, I'm back. I have eyes on the north entrance in the courtyard. There's been a change while I was moving. Go. The senior coordinator, the man I have been assigned to identify, has moved from the lower level to the main communications room. He is with 3 fighters and what appears to be the portable communications drive from the stolen relay equipment. He is preparing to transmit. Based on the setup I'm observing, they are going to begin uploading access codes to an offshore receiver. She stopped for 1 beat. Commander, if that upload completes, the codes that go out will give whoever receives them access to the classified frequency architecture for every American military asset in this hemisphere. The weight of that sentence pressed down on the entire column like a physical force. Barrett stopped humming. Rodriguez, who was 3 men back, said very quietly, "Oh, that's bad." It was in fact extremely bad. It was the kind of bad that transformed what had already been a terrible night into something with consequences that extended far beyond 12 men in a tunnel and 5 hostages in a basement. It was the kind of bad that made acceptable losses into a conversation that people in offices would have for years afterward. How long, Bennett said. Unknown. But the equipment is active. I would estimate they begin the upload within 20 minutes, possibly less. 20 minutes. Bennett turned and looked at his team in the low light of the tunnel. 2 wounded, limited ammunition after the ambush, no surface support, a storm overhead, a compromised command chain they couldn't safely transmit through, and 5 civilians somewhere below them who were going to be buried alive when the storm hit and the cell's commander decided to destroy the entrance rather than let them be recovered. Vasquez, Bennett said. Sir, the ventilation shaft watchman identified. Can you open it quietly? Give me 2 minutes to look at it, and I'll tell you. You have 90 seconds. Vasquez moved. He was the kind of man who didn't need more information than the task itself. You pointed him at a problem, and he solved it with whatever was available, which was a quality that Bennett had come to value so deeply that he sometimes forgot what it looked like when people didn't have it. Hayes stepped close again. You're splitting the team. I have to. We can't move as a unit through a 60-centimeter shaft, and I can't wait for the shaft while the upload starts. The wounded. Stay here with Morales. I need you on this side, Hayes. If something comes through that tunnel behind us, you are what's between whatever it is and 2 men who can't run. Hayes did not argue. He understood the math. He didn't like it, but he understood it. What about the coordinator? Hayes said. Donovan is tracking him. Hayes looked at the ceiling of the tunnel, above them through stone and soil and 40 feet of mountain. Claire Donovan was watching the man responsible for altering the brief that had sent 12 Americans into a prepared ambush. She had been ordered to identify him. She had found him. She was watching him right now. She's going to want to take the shot, Hayes said. She's going to make the right call, Bennett said. And he said it with the kind of certainty that surprised him slightly because he had known this woman's name for less than 2 hours and had never seen her face. But he had heard her voice under sustained fire, heard her prioritize the team's survival over her own concealment, heard her stop and think before every shot rather than reacting. He had heard enough. Vasquez came back. Shaft is accessible. I can open the inner seal without tools. It's a pressure-fitting, older design. The 4-meter restriction is real. Anyone going through needs to strip the chest rig, weapons horizontal. How long for the team to get through? With the restriction, 12-14 minutes for the full element. We don't have 12 minutes for the full element, Bennett said. He made the decision in approximately 4 seconds. I take 4 men through. Bennett, Park, Rodriguez, Sandoval. The rest holds here with Hayes. Sir, Barrett started. Barrett, you're with Hayes. I know you can, Bennett said. That's not what this is about. I need someone here who can shoot straight, and I need Hayes focused on command. You're it. Barrett pressed his lips together, looked at the floor of the tunnel for a moment, then looked up. Copy that. It was the right answer, and they both knew it, and neither of them liked it particularly, and that was the nature of the thing. Bennett turned back to the radio. Watchman, I'm taking a 4-man element through the ventilation shaft into the facility interior. Hayes is holding the tunnel with the remaining personnel. I need you on the coordinator's position and on the north entrance simultaneously. Can you do that? I cannot watch both with equal effectiveness from one position, Claire said immediately. I have to prioritize. Prioritize the coordinator until I'm inside. If the upload starts, I need to know the second it begins. Understood, but Commander, there is one more thing. Say it. The coordinator has a portable drive. Even if you destroy the primary transmitter, if he gets off the facility with that drive, the codes are still compromised. He has a prepared extraction route through the southern access road. I identified it this morning when I observed a vehicle staged there before the ambush. He is planning to leave before the storm peaks. Bennett absorbed that. Can you stop the vehicle? From my current position, yes. Then that's your secondary responsibility. Coordinator first. If he runs for the vehicle, stop the vehicle. And if he has the drive and reaches the vehicle before I can, then you tell me where he's going and we figure it out from there, Bennett said. One problem at a time, Donovan. A pause. One problem at a time, she repeated. And there was something in how she said it, not agreement exactly, but the sound of someone recalibrating from the weight of watching too many problems simultaneously and being reminded that she didn't have to solve all of them alone. That reminder mattered. Bennett could hear that it mattered. Trident 1 is moving, he said. Keep the light on for us. Copy. Watchman has your back. Bennett looked at Park, Rodriguez, and Sandoval. 3 men. Each of them met his eyes and gave the same small nod, the one that meant they understood what was being asked, and they were prepared to answer it. He turned toward the ventilation shaft, and that was when Hayes said very quietly but with a sharpness that stopped every man in the tunnel, "Commander, listen. Boots, above them, on the surface of the tunnel ceiling. Moving fast, not the measured pace of a patrol, the urgent, purposeful stride of fighters who had found something and were moving toward it. The grate, the sealed grate behind them. Someone was at the grate. They found the entrance, Rodriguez said. How, Vasquez said. And then Claire's voice came through the radio, lower than it had been before, tight, with something that was not quite panic, but was the controlled cousin of it. Trident 1, one of the wounded operators left a blood trail. I can see it from here. 2 fighters found the grate 30 seconds ago. They are calling for support. You have approximately 2 minutes before they have numbers to breach it. 2 minutes. Bennett looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Barrett. Barrett looked at the sealed grate 50 meters behind them, where 2 fighters were already calling their friends. Hayes, Bennett said. I've got it. Hayes said simply. Go. You've got 6 men and 2 wounded against whatever comes through that gate. I've got 6 men and 2 wounded and a radio connected to the best set of eyes on this island, Hayes said. Go, Commander. We'll hold. Bennett held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he tapped Park on the shoulder and moved toward the shaft. The tunnel behind him stayed quiet for exactly 90 seconds. Then he heard Hayes's voice through the radio, steady, controlled, not panicked, never panicked, giving the first contact report as the fighters began working the grate. And above all of them, on a rain-soaked ridge with bleeding hands in a scope that was already accumulating water on its lens, Claire Donovan shifted her position, found the courtyard, found the north entrance, found the coordinator's building, and began counting threats again. The storm hit the island fully at that moment, not as a warning, as an arrival, and Claire didn't move. The ventilation shaft was exactly as narrow as Claire had described. 4 meters of compressed darkness, where a grown man in body armor became something closer to a problem of geometry than a question of courage. Bennett went first, stripping his chest rig and pushing it ahead of him, pulling himself forward with his elbows against stone that hadn't been touched in years. Park followed, then Rodriguez, then Sandoval. 4 men, moving in complete silence. 53 hours into an operation that was supposed to be clean. Bennett emerged into the main shaft on the other side and immediately pressed against the wall, weapon up, listening. Nothing. The shaft opened into a maintenance corridor that ran perpendicular to what his instincts told him was the north wall of the facility's lower level. The air was different down here, processed, recycled, carrying the specific chemical smell of aging electronics and standing water. Somewhere ahead of him, through 2 or 3 walls he couldn't yet see, 5 engineers were being held by fighters who were now aware that American operators were on the island and getting closer. He keyed the radio softly. Watchman Trident 1. 4 men are through. We're in the lower corridor. Where is the coordinator right now? Claire's response came back in a whisper so controlled it barely registered as human voice. She had dropped her volume because she was close to something she didn't want to be detected near. That alone told Bennett her situation had changed. I is still in the communications room. Upload has not started. I can see activity through the window. They are having a problem with the equipment. Something is not connecting the way they expected. A pause. You may have more time than we thought, but I want to be clear, May. Copy. What's the status on Hayes? Hayes answered before Claire could. His voice was the one Bennett had been dreading, tight, fast, the cadence of a man managing multiple things simultaneously while pretending to manage only one. We are holding. They breached the grate 4 minutes ago. There were 6 of them. There are now 3. Barrett is doing fine. A half-second pause. He is doing better than fine, actually. Bennett allowed himself exactly 1 second of relief about that. 1 second. Then he moved it aside. Can you hold as long as we need to? Hayes said. And that was Hayes, not yes and not probably, but exactly the amount of certainty that was available, and not 1 degree more. 3 years of working together, and Bennett still thought it was the most useful quality a man could have. Park touched Bennett's shoulder and pointed north along the corridor. There was light ahead, the yellow-orange of emergency lighting along a low ceiling, and beneath the sound of the storm overhead, the faint, specific sound of people who were trying not to make noise and not quite succeeding. Voices carefully controlled. Movement that was deliberate rather than casual. The hostages or fighters guarding the hostages. No way to determine which from 40 meters away. Bennett signaled the element forward. 4 men moving on a corridor tight measured each one reading the space ahead through the man in front of him. This was the part of the work that looked easy in training videos and is in reality an exercise in sustained conscious control of every instinct that tells you to move faster, act sooner, do something before something is done to you. He had been doing this for 15 years. It still required effort every single time. They were 20 meters from the light source when Claire's voice came back, and this time the control in it had a new edge. Not panic, but the specific sharpness of someone who has seen something change and is deciding how quickly to communicate it. Commander, the coordinator just stood up. He is moving toward the equipment rack. I think the connection problem is resolved. Bennett stopped the element with a closed fist. Time. If he initiates now, 12 minutes to full upload, maybe less. The equipment is faster than the standard relay configuration. They modified it. 12 minutes. He looked at Park. Park looked at him. Rodriguez and Sandoval stopped behind them, reading the pause. Where is the hostage holding room relative to the communications room? Bennett asked. Adjacent, shared wall northern side. There is a reinforced door between them. I cannot see the locking mechanism from here, but based on the facility layout in the engineering records, it is a manual bar lock. Interior, meaning someone inside locked it from the inside, or someone outside locked it from the outside using a secondary mechanism. I cannot confirm which. Bennett moved the element forward again. 12 minutes, no 11 now. He stopped counting in round numbers and started counting in single digits, because single digits forced a different quality of decision-making. Single digits meant you stopped asking whether and started asking how. They reached the edge of the light, and he looked around the corner. 2 fighters in the corridor, both facing away toward a door at the far end. Between Bennett's position and that door, nothing except 15 meters of corridor and the specific mathematics of 2 men versus 4. He looked at Park, made a hand signal. Park nodded, touched Rodriguez's arm, and the decision was made in the time it takes most people to read a single line of text. It was over in 9 seconds. No shots fired. The corridor stayed quiet. Bennett was already moving to the door before the last second of it finished because 9 seconds was 9 seconds he didn't have to spare. The door was not locked from the outside. It was locked from the inside, which meant what was inside had either locked itself in for protection or had been locked in by someone smart enough to make the lock appear to originate from the inside. Bennett put his ear to the door and heard breathing. Multiple people. Controlled breathing. The kind of breathing that people do when they have been told to stay quiet and are trying very hard to honor that instruction. This is Commander Cole Bennett, United States Navy, he said, pitched low directly at the door. I need whoever is on the other side of this door to tell me how many people are in that room and whether you are injured. Silence. 3 seconds of it. The kind of silence that means people are deciding whether the voice outside is real or a test. Then a woman's voice. Clear, precise, not shaking despite every reason it should have been. My name is Dr. Allison Reed. There are 5 of us. 2 are injured, minor lacerations, nothing critical. We have been here for 4 days. A pause of exactly 1 beat. Are you actually here? We're here, Dr. Reed. I need you to move away from the door. The bar lock came off from the inside with a sound like a deep exhale, and the door opened, and Bennett saw 5 faces that all carried the same expression. Not relief, not quite. Because relief requires believing the danger is over. And these were engineers, people who dealt in systems and data and real-world constraints, and they understood perfectly well that being found by 4 men in a basement was not the same thing as being safe. Dr. Reed was the first to speak. She was somewhere in her late 40s, short hair, wearing the remains of professional clothing that had survived 4 days of captivity, with her dignity mostly intact. She looked at Bennett the way someone looks at a person they have decided to trust, because the alternative is unthinkable. The transmitter, she said. You need to know about the transmitter. I know about it, Bennett said. You don't know all of it. She stepped closer, dropping her voice. They modified the upload protocol 2 days ago. The original system required a handshake from a receiving station. The modified version doesn't. Once the upload initiates, it pushes autonomously even if the receiver goes offline. You cannot stop it from the receiving end. You can only stop it here at the source before it reaches 30% completion. She looked at him steadily. After 30%, the packet fragments and distributes. There is no recall. Bennett processed that in about 2 seconds. Where is the transmitter physically located? Communications room. North side second rack from the left. It is connected to an external antenna on the roof of the building. She paused. The antenna cable runs through the ceiling of this corridor. If you cut the cable here, you stop the transmission at the hardware level, regardless of what the software is doing. Park had heard all of this and was already looking at the ceiling. Sandoval was right behind him. Rodriguez had moved to cover the corridor entrance. Bennett keyed his radio. "Watchman, has the upload initiated?" Claire came back immediately. "Not yet. He is still at the equipment rack. I think he is running a diagnostic. You have a window, but Commander, he has 2 fighters with him, and there is a third stationed outside the communications room door on the upper level. I cannot engage through the wall from my current angle. If your men go for that room directly." "We're not going for the room directly," Bennett said. "We're cutting the cable from below." He looked at Sandoval. "Do it." Sandoval went to work on the ceiling with the efficiency of someone who has done this before, which he had in 3 different countries under 3 different sets of circumstances, none of which had been as complicated as this one. The cable was where Reed said it would be. He had it identified in 40 seconds and severed in 60. "Watchman, confirm, is there any change in the communications room?" 8 seconds of silence. Bennett was counting. "The equipment rack just went dark," Claire said. He is checking the connections. He knows something failed, but he does not know what. He is calling on the radio for technical support." "How long before they find the cut?" "Cut, unknown. If they trace the cable manually, 10 minutes. If they have a diagnostic tool, less. 10 minutes that were now 8 minutes because 2 had already passed since Reed's warning about the 30% threshold. Bennett stood in the corridor with 5 civilians, 4 operators, a compromised command channel, a storm overhead, and a facility full of fighters who were getting better at knowing where the Americans were. Hamad, the call that the mission parameters said he was not supposed to make, but that every instinct developed over 15 years told him was the only call available. "Trident 1, all elements. We are moving the civilians to the tunnel junction. Hayes, I need you to clear a path from the south junction to the maintenance corridor entry. Watchman, I need eyes on every exit point in the next 5 minutes. We are coming out." Hayes came back fast. "Copy, but Commander, there is a problem on my end." Bennett stopped. "Say." 3 more fighters came through the tunnel from the southern access. "We are holding, but I have used Barrett's position to cover the east approach, and I have Morales tied up with Hernandez. I have 4 effectives, and they have 6. We can hold the junction, but we cannot clear a path." Bennett looked at the 5 civilians. 2 of them were supporting a third who had a wrapped ankle that probably hurt more than the engineer was admitting. Reed was standing straight, watching Bennett with the focused attention of someone who understood that the decisions being made in the next 30 seconds would determine the shape of everything that followed. That was when Claire spoke, and what she said was not what any of them expected. "I can fix the Hayes problem." Bennett frowned. "From your position, you can't reach the tunnel junction from the surface." "No, but I can reach the fighters who are trying to get to it." A pause. "There is an access hatch on the south exterior that opens above the tunnel junction. It is used for equipment maintenance. The fighters came in through that hatch. If I close the hatch from the outside and disable the external mechanism, they cannot get reinforcements through it. The 3 already inside are Hayes' problem. The 20 more outside become mine." Bennett heard what she was saying. She was describing leaving her concealed position on the ridge, the position that had kept her safe for the last 90 minutes, and moving to the facility exterior. On foot, in a storm, across open ground that was being actively patrolled by fighters who very much wanted to find the source of the rifle shots that had been disrupting their operation. "Donovan," he said, and again he was aware of using her name rather than her call sign without having decided to. "What is your current position relative to the facility exterior?" "Approximately 240 meters from the south hatch. I can reach it." "Under fire. Under patrol activity. There is a difference. The patrol pattern has a gap at the south corner that repeats every 4 minutes. I have observed it 7 times. It is consistent. Consistent until it isn't, Bennett said. Yes, she said, that is always true. And she said it simply without drama, the way someone states a fact they have already made their peace with. Bennett pressed his hand flat against the corridor wall and thought for exactly 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, he calculated everything he knew about the situation, everything he didn't know, everything that was already decided, and everything that could still be changed. And at the end of those 4 seconds, he arrived at the same place Claire had already been standing for the last 2 minutes. Take the gap at the south corner, he said. Close the hatch. Then get yourself to a covered position and reestablish overwatch. Do not engage unless you have to. Understood. And Donovan, do not be a hero. A pause, and then something he hadn't heard from her before, subtle but real, a sound that might in different circumstances have been the edge of a small, tired smile. I'm just the person with the best view, she said. Moving now. The radio went to her movement silence, and Bennett turned back to his element in the 5 civilians in the corridor that was going to have to become a route in the next few minutes, whether it was ready to be one or not. Reed was watching him. Who is she? Reed asked. Someone who has been watching this facility for 2 days, Bennett said. Reed absorbed that. Alone. Reed looked at the ceiling for a moment toward the storm and the ridge and the invisible woman moving through both. Then she looked back at Bennett with an expression that had shifted subtly from controlled fear to something more complicated. The look of a person who has been a hostage for 4 days and has been telling themselves that help might be coming and is now confronted with the specific form that help has taken, which is not what they imagined and is somehow more real because of that. How do we move? Reed said. Close behind me. Fast when I say fast. Stop when I say stop. Don't ask why. Understood. Is there anyone in your group who cannot move at pace? Reed looked back at her colleagues. The man with the ankle wound met her eyes and straightened deliberately. I can move, he said. His name was Cho, and he was an electrical engineer from Honolulu, and Bennett would never know anything else about him, except that in the moment he said those 3 words, he meant every syllable. Then let's go, Bennett said. They moved north through the lower corridor, 4 operators, 5 civilians, 9 people trying to move with the discipline of 12, and mostly managing it because the alternative was not one that anyone in the group was prepared to accept. At the corridor junction, they heard the fight, not the sustained, organized exchange of the channel. Ambush. This was the compressed, close-quarters sound of men in a tunnel who were too close to each other for anyone to get a clean angle on anything, where every advantage and disadvantage changed positions every 10 seconds. Hayes's voice came through the radio in short bursts, calling positions, redirecting men, managing a situation that was held together by the specific, irreplaceable quality of Hayes himself. Junction in 30 seconds, Bennett said into the radio. I'm coming in from the north. Copy, Hayes said. Barrett is on your left when you come through. Don't shoot him. Tell him not to shoot me. He already knows. He's been asking about you for the last 4 minutes. Bennett came through the junction with Park behind him and found Hayes exactly where he expected to find Hayes, in the center of everything, directing men with hand signals that they read instantly positioned so that he could see all 3 approach vectors simultaneously. The 3 fighters in the tunnel were engaged on the east approach, which meant they had not yet repositioned to cover the north corridor, which meant Bennett had approximately 15 seconds before that changed. I used 12 of them. The junction cleared, all 3 fighters down, 9 Americans standing in a tunnel junction with the sound of the storm overhead and the distant, regular rhythm of Claire's situation playing out somewhere in the dark on the other side of the south hatch. Barrett appeared at Bennett's side. His right arm was wrapped tight, held against his body, but his left hand was holding his weapon, and his eyes were clear and present and focused. Good to see you, sir, Barrett said. Good to see you too, Bennett said. How's the arm? It stopped complaining. That's not always good news. No, Barrett said, but it's the news I've got. Then Claire's voice came back through the radio, and it was different. The control was still there. It was always there with her. It seemed to be structural rather than practiced. But underneath it was something that Bennett had not heard from her in 2 hours of the worst night he had ever spent on an island. Something that sounded for just a moment like strain. Hatch is closed. External mechanism is disabled. You will not receive reinforcements through the south access. A breath. One breath slightly longer than her usual cadence. However, I was observed during the approach. I engaged 1 fighter, 2 others are now searching the south perimeter. I am in cover inside the old weather station structure at the edge of the facility compound. I have lost my ridge position. Bennett felt the shift in the room. Hayes looked at him. Barrett looked at Hayes. She was inside the compound perimeter now. Not on the ridge, not at distance. Inside with 2 fighters actively searching for her concealment, advantage reduced to whatever the shell of an old weather station could provide. Are you wounded? Bennett said. No, a pause. My primary scope took a strike from a ricochet. I am on backup. Can you still cover the courtyard? Yes, but my effective range is reduced, and Commander, the coordinator, is moving again. He has a portable drive, and he is heading for the north exit. He knows the cable was cut. He is going to try to reach the vehicle on the south road and transmit from there. Everything converged at once. The coordinator moving, Claire inside the compound, Hayes with the civilians, the storm at full force, the south road vehicle. Bennett turned to Hayes. Get the civilians and the wounded to the coast shelter. Standard route. And you? I'm going after the coordinator. With who? Bennett looked at Park and Rodriguez. They were already moving to flank him without being asked. That was the answer. Hayes started to say something. Watchman has the courtyard, Bennett said. She'll guide me. Go. Hayes looked at him for 1 second with the expression of a man who has run out of arguments and knows it. Then he turned and started moving the civilians south through the tunnel. Bennett keyed the radio. Donovan, talk me through the courtyard. Where is he right now? Claire's response was immediate. She had been watching. She was always watching. He just cleared the north corridor. He is moving toward the east courtyard exit. 2 fighters with him. He has the drive in his left hand. A short pause. Commander Dr. Reed, is she with you or with Hayes? With Hayes, why? Because the coordinator is moving fast, and the south road is 140 meters from the east exit. If he reaches the vehicle before you reach the courtyard, the only intercept point is the road itself, and I cannot guarantee a safe shot on the road because there are civilians in the line if he reverses toward the tunnel. She had almost said Reed's name. She had stopped herself because she was precise even when she was running on nothing. Even with 2 fighters searching the building she was hiding in, even with a damaged scope and bleeding hands. I hear you, Bennett said. Don't take the road shot. Even if he's going to get away. Even then, Bennett said, if he gets to the vehicle, you tell me which direction he drives and we solve it on the other end. A pause. Copy, she said. Then Bennett moved left when you enter the courtyard. Hard left. There is a fighter on the roof directly above the east exit who I cannot engage from my current angle. He will see you in 3 steps if you go straight. Bennett was already moving. He entered the courtyard. Hard left felt rather than saw the fighter above him, heard the burst of fire that went past his right shoulder. By a distance, he did not stop to measure and kept moving. Park took the roof. Rodriguez covered the second fighter. And Bennett ran through the rain and the dark and the wind of a Pacific storm that was trying to push him sideways, ran toward the east exit with his eyes already searching the far side for a man with a portable drive and a vehicle in 70 meters of head start. He saw him at 50 meters. The coordinator was faster than Bennett expected, moving with the specific urgency of a man who understood exactly what he was carrying and what it was worth and what happened to him if he didn't get it to the people waiting for it. But Bennett was 15 years of running toward things that were trying to get away. 40 meters. The coordinator was reaching the vehicle now, pulling the door, turning to look back, and his eyes found Bennett in the dark, the way 2 people's eyes find each other in a crowd when the circumstances require it. And for 1 single second, they looked directly at each other across the rain in the distance. Bennett didn't slow down. 30 meters. The coordinator reached into his jacket. Claire's voice. He is wrong in a weapon. I have him in my scope, but Reed's element is 20 meters south on the parallel path. I cannot. Don't fire, Bennett said. 20 meters. He hit the coordinator at full speed at 15 meters, and they went down together against the vehicle, and the drive hit the ground and skidded, and the weapon came up, and Bennett's hand came down on the coordinator's wrist, and the weapon fired once into the dirt and then stopped firing because Bennett's knee was on the coordinator's forearm, and the fight went out of the situation very quickly after that. Silence. Relative silence. Storm overhead. Rain on the vehicle roof. Bennett's own breathing. He found the drive 6 inches from his right hand. He picked it up. He held it for a moment in the rain, feeling the weight of it, smaller than a deck of cards, lighter than a phone. containing enough information to compromise every American military frequency in an entire hemisphere. He closed his fist around it. "Watchman," he said, "package is secured. Coordinator is down." Claire's voice came back, and it was quieter than before, and not because of radio clarity. "Copy Trident 1, package is secured." A breath. "Good." Just that, good. One word from a woman who had been awake for 53 hours, who was hiding in a damaged building with 2 fighters searching for her, who had moved from a ridge to a compound in a storm to close a hatch so that 12 men could hold a tunnel junction, who had watched a coordinator run for a vehicle and held her shot because a civilian was 20 meters south on a parallel path. Good. Bennett stood up in the rain with the drive in his hand and the coordinator secured on the ground, and Park and Rodriguez coming through the east exit behind him, and he looked toward the dark bulk of the old weather station, where somewhere inside invisible Claire Donovan was still watching the courtyard. "Donovan," he said, "is still here." "I know," he said. "I know you are." And then Hayes's voice came through the channel, sharp and fast. "Commander, we have a problem at the South Road. Multiple fighters between the civilians and the coast shelter. I count 9. We cannot move through without support." Bennett looked at Park. Park looked at him. Rodriguez was already checking his ammunition count. And from the weather station, without being asked, without waiting for the question, "I see them," Claire said. "I have the courtyard lights in my angle. Give me a second." The courtyard flooded into darkness as the facility's floodlights went out simultaneously. All of them. The backup generator that Claire had identified during her 2 days of observation, the external control panel she had marked on her mental map of the compound, gone dark at a single shot from a backup scope, at a distance that most trained shooters would have called inadvisable. Hayes's voice. "They lost coordination. They're not moving. Go now. Go." The civilians moved, and in the dark compound, in an abandoned weather station with a damaged scope and hands that hadn't stopped bleeding since the first position change on the ridge, Claire Donovan tracked the remaining fighters through her backup site and made sure that none of them found the 9 Americans and 5 civilians moving through the dark toward the coast. She was not done, but she was close. And the storm, for the first time since it arrived, began to feel like it was working for them rather than against them. The coast shelter was a concrete box that had not been used for anything official in 11 years. It smelled like salt and old insulation, in the specific kind of abandonment that collects in buildings that people stop caring about before anyone wrote down why. It had 1 door, 2 narrow windows that were not quite large enough to fire through comfortably, and a roof that was doing its level best against a storm that had stopped pretending to be reasonable about 40 minutes ago. Hayes got the civilians through the door first. That was automatic wounded and non-combatants before everyone else, always without discussion, because that was the order. Things were supposed to happen, and Hayes was a man who believed in the order of things, especially when everything around the order was falling apart. Dr. Reed came through the door and stopped just inside, turning back to count heads. 5 engineers. She got to 5, and her shoulders dropped exactly 1 centimeter, the involuntary physical release of a person who has been holding a specific fear for 4 days and can finally provisionally set it down. "Choke," she said quietly. "Here," said the man with the ankle wound coming through last, limping hard but moving. "Still here." She nodded once. That was all she allowed herself. Then she turned to Hayes and said, "What do you need from us?" Hayes looked at her for a moment. In his experience, which was extensive, civilians and hostage situations fell into 2 categories: after rescue, those who needed to be managed and those who could be used. Reed had been in the second category since the moment Bennett described her. "Stay low, stay away from the windows, and if I tell you to move, move immediately and ask questions later." "Understood," Reed said. She looked at the other 4 engineers, and they nodded without her having to repeat it. Barrett came through the door behind the last seal and immediately found the wall and put his back against it. His face was pale in the way that faces get when a body has been running on adrenaline for a long time, and the adrenaline is starting to calculate whether it can afford to keep the pace. His arm had been rewrapped during the tunnel movement, and Morales had done a clean job of it, but clean job was not the same as fixed, and they both knew it. "Sit down," Morales said, appearing beside him. "I'm fine standing." "You are going to sit down, or I am going to tell Hayes you asked me to make you sit down, and then Hayes will tell you to sit down, and then you will sit down anyway, and you will also owe me $20. Barrett sat down. Good, Morales said and knelt beside him and started checking the rap with the focused efficiency of a man who had been doing this for 6 hours, under conditions that medical school had not specifically prepared him for. Bennett came through the door last. He stood in the entrance for exactly 3 seconds, scanning the interior, counting heads, doing the math that commanders do every time a threshold is crossed, the math that starts with everyone and checks itself against the number actually present. 14 people in the shelter, 4 operators, 8 SEALs, 2 wounded, 5 civilians. 14. He exhaled. Then he keyed his radio. Watchman, what is your current position? The response came back after a pause that was 4 seconds too long. Still in the weather station. I have 3 fighters approximately 30 meters to my south who have not located me yet. There is a 4th on the east wall who stopped moving 6 minutes ago. I don't know if he stopped because he found something or because he lost the trail. Another pause, even shorter. I think he lost the trail. Can you move? Not yet. The 3 to the south are covering the direct route to the coast road. If they shift or go in for a search pattern, I will have a window. Bennett turned to Hayes. Hayes was already looking at him. Between them passed the same unspoken communication they had been having all night, the one that started with the thing they were both thinking and ended with the thing they were both going to do about it. We go back for her, Hayes said. It was not a question. We go back for her, Bennett said. Rodriguez, who was checking his ammunition against the wall, said without looking up, obviously. I'll go, Barrett said from the floor. You will stay here, Morales said in the tone that medical personnel use when they have stopped requesting and started informing. Morales, Barrett, your arm is held together by field dressing and my optimism. You are staying here. Barrett looked at Bennett. Bennett looked back at him with an expression that said the same thing Morales had just said, but without the $20 threat attached. You are the best shooter in this room right now, Bennett said. I need you at that window covering our approach back. Barrett was quiet for 2 seconds. Then, yes, sir. It was the right answer and it cost him something, and Bennett knew both things. He turned to Hayes. Park, Rodriguez, Sandoval, you 3 are with me. 4 men, Hayes said. You stay here. You run this shelter, and if something comes through that door while we're outside, there is no one else I trust with these civilians. Hayes opened his mouth. Closed it. The argument died before it started because the logic was sound, and Hayes, whatever else he was a man who followed sound logic even when it frustrated him. Bring her back, Hayes said. That's the plan, Bennett said. He keyed the radio again. Donovan, I am coming to you with 3 men. I need you to tell me where those 4 fighters are right now, and I need you to tell me every 30 seconds. The pause this time was different. It had a texture to it that Bennett was beginning to recognize, the pause that meant Claire was processing something she hadn't anticipated and was deciding how to respond to it. Commander, I don't need an extraction team. I can move when the window opens. I know you can, Bennett had said. We're coming anyway. Another pause, shorter. The 3 fighters to my south just split. 1 is moving east toward the antenna building. 2 are continuing south. If you approach from the north road and move to the weather station's rear wall, you will be in a dead angle between their positions. You have approximately 6 minutes before the split fighter completes the antenna building check and returns. After that, the angle closes. 6 minutes, Bennett said. He looked at Park, Rodriguez, and Sandoval. Let's move. They went out the door and into the storm, and the storm received them the way it had received everything on this island tonight, with complete indifference. The wind had reached the point where it was an active physical obstacle rather than a condition. Rain came in horizontal sheets. Visibility was down to 20 meters in the open, less against dark surfaces. Bennett moved north by feel and compass, heading Park on his left shoulder, Rodriguez and Sandoval behind in a tight stack. He counted seconds, not minutes, seconds, because 6 minutes was 360 seconds and each one of them had a specific shape when you were moving through them rather than watching them pass. 200 seconds in Claire's voice. The east fighter has entered the antenna building. 2 fighters continuing south. They are now 40 meters from my position, moving away. Your angle is open. Move to the rear wall. You will see a collapsed section on the northeast corner. Entry point is there. 240 seconds. Bennett was at the rear wall. The collapsed section was 3 feet of broken concrete and rusted rebar that offered entry into the weather station's back room, without passing any of the 4 windows that faced the patrol positions. He went through first. The inside was dark and smelled of rain and old metal. His boots found the floor and he stopped absolutely still and listened. Breathing, controlled and deliberate, coming from his left low approximately 6 feet away. "Donovan," he said very quietly. "Here," she said. He turned on a shielded light for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds was enough. She was behind an overturned equipment rack that gave her a low profile and a line of sight through a crack in the north wall toward the courtyard. Her rifle was propped at an angle that allowed her to shoot from a prone position without raising her head above the rack. Her backup scope was mounted and properly aligned. Her hands, both of them, were wrapped in field dressing that had gone dark with blood, that had dried and then been supplemented by new blood over the top of the old. She looked at Bennett with eyes that were completely focused and completely exhausted, in the specific combination that belongs to people who have been running on will for longer than will is designed to run alone. She did not look like a legend. She looked like a soldier who had done everything that was asked of her and several things that weren't and was still doing them. "You came back," she said, and her voice for the first time all night was not entirely flat. There was something in it that she hadn't planned to put there. "Did you think we wouldn't?" Bennett said. A pause, the honest kind. "I didn't let myself think about it either way," she said. "It wasn't useful." That was the most truthful thing anyone had said all night, and Bennett recognized it as such. "Can you move?" he said. "Yes." "How fast?" She considered the question with the same seriousness she had applied to every other question tonight. "Faster than you think. Not as fast as I could 8 hours ago." "That's enough," Bennett said. He looked at Park. "We move on her signal. She knows the patrol positions better than we do." Park nodded and moved to cover the entry point. Rodriguez took the south crack. Sandoval covered their 6. Claire pulled herself up from behind the rack. She did it slowly enough that Bennett almost reached out to help and then stopped because he understood intuitively that this was not a moment where assistance would be received the way he meant it. She stood, settled the rifle against her shoulder, and did a single slow scan through the north crack. The east fighter is still in the antenna building. The 2 southern fighters are now 60 meters out and moving parallel to the coast road. They are searching the brush, not the building. We have a window of approximately 4 minutes before the east fighter completes his check. She turned to Bennett. "North wall, then west to the road, then south to the coast shelter. 40 meters of open ground between the road and the shelter door. Who covers those 40 meters? "I do," she said, not with any particular emphasis. The same tone she had used for every other answer all night. "You're coming with us," Bennett said. "I know. I cover while we move, then I'm the last one through the door. Same thing I've been doing it all night." She looked at him steadily. "Commander, I have done this before." He believed her. He had believed her since the second transmission, when she described his team's position with the accuracy of someone who had been watching long enough to know the details. He had just been waiting for a moment to say so. "So, I know you have," he said. "Let's go." They went north first, then west, moving fast through the wind and the rain. Claire was behind Bennett, which was not where a wounded soldier belonged, and was exactly where she needed to be for the exit covering fire. And she moved with the efficiency of someone who had made the decision long before the conversation about it. She was not quiet about the pain. She was quiet about showing it, which was different. The distinction cost her something, and she paid it without advertising the cost. They hit the road, turned south. The shelter was visible barely through the rain as a dark rectangle with one amber glow behind the door, where haze had allowed a single shielded light for the civilians. 30 meters, 20. The antenna building door opened. The east fighter stepped out. He was looking north toward the facility, which was the direction that made sense because that was where the noise had been all night. He had not yet turned to look south toward the road. Claire stopped, walking. Bennett stopped. Park, Rodriguez, Sandoval stopped. Everyone stopped simultaneously in the way that experienced people stop when someone with better information than they have stops. The fighter took 3 steps north, stopped, looked at the ground. Bennett could see his posture shift, the slight forward lean of a man who has seen something on the ground that he wasn't expecting to see. Blood from Claire's hands. On the road they had just walked. The fighter began to turn, Claire's voice in Bennett's ear absolutely level. "Go, all 4 of you go now. Don't stop at the door. Donovan, go, Commander. I will be 6 seconds behind you." I went because she said to, and because she was right, and because the alternative was all four of them standing in the road when that fighter finished turning around. He went and Park went and Rodriguez went and Sandoval went, and they covered 20 meters in the kind of time that fear produces in trained bodies, and Hayes pulled the door open from the inside and they went through. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Bennett was already turning back to the door. Hayes had his arm. Give her the 6 seconds. 4 seconds. 5. A single shot. From close 20 meters, maybe less. The backup scope, short range. The specific flat sound of a suppressed rifle that still makes a sound, because all suppressed rifles still make a sound, just a smaller one. 6 seconds. Claire came through the door. She pulled it shut behind her, set her rifle against the wall, and put her back against the door and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds that she allowed herself. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Bennett. He found the blood trail, she said. I know. I couldn't let him radio it in. I know that too. She nodded, looked at the room. Her eyes moved from face to face the way a person's eyes move when they have been alone for a long time. And the presence of other people is information that takes a moment to process correctly. Her gaze settled briefly on Barrett, who was on the floor against the wall with Morales beside him. And Barrett looked back at her with the specific expression of someone who has been wanting to say something for the last 3 hours and is now calculating whether this is the right moment. He decided it was. Ma'am, Barrett said, I'm the one with the arm wound. You're the reason I still have it. Claire looked at him. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile but occupied the same general territory. How bad is it? She said. Morales keeps calling it manageable, which means it hurts a lot. Manageable is a good word, she said. Hold on to manageable. She moved to the east window, the one that covered the facility approach, and looked through it with the focused attention of a person who has not stopped working and is not planning to start stopping. Hayes appeared at her left shoulder with a water bottle which he held out without comment. She took it, drank half of it in one motion, handed it back. Thank you, she said. Thank you, Hayes said, and he said it in the tone of a man who means significantly more than 2 words can carry but has chosen 2 words, because anything more would embarrass them both. Bennett was at the radio. He had made the decision to transmit from the shelter because the shelter was the shelter. There was no further concealment to be gained by staying dark. And there was significant information that needed to move up the chain before anyone made a decision above his level that made things worse. Command, this is Trident 1 Actual. Authentication Bravo 79er. I am transmitting on emergency secondary, and I need you to listen to everything I say before you respond. The command frequency crackled to life. The controller on the other end was professional enough not to say the words that Bennett could hear forming in the silence. The words about mission deviation and radio silence and unauthorized routing. He had heard those words before. He could hear when they were being suppressed. When transmitted the full situation report in 3.5 minutes, enemy strength, hostage location and status, tunnel junction contact, communications drive secured, coordinator in custody, intelligence compromise, the altered brief, the Pearl Harbor access credentials. The silence on the other end, after he finished, lasted exactly 8 seconds. Then the controller said, Trident 1, we are initiating an immediate review of the access log you described. I need you to confirm, do you have the communications drive physically in your possession? Affirmative, and the coordinator, secured at our current position. He is alive and able to answer questions. Another pause, shorter this time. Commander, be advised the individual whose credentials were used to modify your brief has been flagged by base security at Pearl Harbor in the last 2 hours. They are in custody. I cannot give you more detail on an open channel. Bennett looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at the ceiling briefly in the way that people look at ceilings when they are processing information that they are glad to receive but had hoped would not be necessary. The person who sold us out is in custody, Bennett said quietly. Hayes exhaled. Good, he said. Then after a moment, not good enough, but good. Reed had heard. She was sitting against the far wall with the 4 engineers around her, and when Bennett said the words, she closed her eyes briefly and then opened them and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. The look of someone processing a fact that changes the shape of the last 4 days in a way that will take a long time to fully understand. Cho reached over and put his hand on her arm. She didn't look at him, but she didn't move her arm either. Claire was still at the window. She had not participated in the command transmission. She had not said anything about the arrested officer. She was watching the facility approach with steady attention, tracking movement patterns, noting positions, doing the work she had been doing for 55 hours with the same methodical focus she had brought to the first hour of it. Bennett moved to stand beside her. "The leak is closed," he said quietly. "I heard. How are your hands?" She looked at them briefly as if she needed the visual reminder to assess them accurately. "I'll need them looked at when we get off the island. Morales can do it now." "When we get off the island," she repeated, not with defiance, with the calm firmness of a person who has identified the correct priority order and is not interested in renegotiating it while the situation is still active. Bennett let it go. He stood beside her at the window and looked out at the rain and the dark and the facility, 200 meters north, where the remaining fighters were doing what remaining fighters do when a night goes badly, regrouping, reassessing, trying to determine what they still had and what they had lost. "They'll come for the shelter eventually," Claire said. "Not all of them. The storm is turning them inward, but some of them will come." "How many?" 6 to 8, the ones whose chain of command is still functional without the coordinator. She paused. "Probably 4, the ones with enough discipline to move in this weather." "When back?" 20 minutes, maybe 30 if the wind keeps shifting. Bennett thought about that for a moment. 14 people, 2 wounded, limited ammunition, a shelter that was defensible but not indefinitely, a storm that was cycling through its worst phase, Coast Guard extraction that couldn't fly in the current conditions. "What's the storm doing?" he said. Claire had been tracking it the way she tracked everything continuously without announcement. It peaked approximately 40 minutes ago. "The outer bands are moving east. There will be a flyable window in the next 90 minutes, possibly less." She looked at him. "But we need to be out of this shelter and at the extraction point before that window opens, because the window may last as little as 20 minutes. "Where is the extraction point?" "The flat ground north of the old Coast Guard dock. 60 meters of clear approach. No obstacles above 12 feet. A helicopter can put down there if the pilot is good." "Coast Guard pilots are good," Barrett said from the floor. He had been listening. In Bennett's experience, Barrett was always listening. "Then we need to be there when the window opens," Claire said. "We'll be there," Bennett said. And he said it with the same certainty that Hayes had used when he said they would hold the tunnel junction. The certainty that is not a prediction but a commitment, which is a different thing and matters more. The next 20 minutes were the kind of 20 minutes that teach people things about themselves that they would rather learn any other way. The 4 fighters Claire had predicted came at the shelter 18 minutes after her estimate, which was close enough to feel like foreknowledge and far enough to provide 2 extra minutes that the team used to position correctly. Hayes ran the defensive action with a precision that Bennett, watching from the east window where Claire had put him, recognized as one of the best displays of tactical management he had seen in 15 years. Hayes moved people by name and position with the calm authority of a man who has already decided the outcome and is simply conducting events toward the conclusion he has already reached in his head. Barrett from the floor with one good arm, and Morales hovering 4 feet away with an expression caught between professional concern and genuine admiration, provided covering fire through the east window that was accurate enough to make the approaching fighters reconsider their approach angle twice in 30 seconds. 2 reconsiderations in 30 seconds was 2 more than Barrett owed anyone given the arm. Claire was at the north window. She engaged twice, 2 shots, 2 results, 2 fighters who stopped being problems. The remaining 2 withdrew after the second shot and did not return. She tracked them for 4 minutes after they disappeared to confirm the withdrawal before she turned from the window. The shelter held. When it was over, Hayes sat down on the floor, not because he was hurt, but because 15 hours of sustained decision-making at the level Hayes had been operating at requires a moment of stillness when the moment becomes available, and Hayes was human enough to take it. Dr. Reed sat down next to him. They did not speak, but she handed him the second half of a water bottle that she had been saving, and he accepted it without comment and drank it, and that was its own kind of conversation. Bennett checked the storm. The rain had shifted. The wind had dropped from a sustained roar to a heavy push. The outer bands were moving. "Donovan," he said. She was beside him immediately. She had been beside him without him noticing, which was her professional habit, And also he was beginning to understand something more general to her character, the quality of someone who was always present without requiring acknowledgement for the presence. "I see it," she said. "The window is opening early. We need to move in the next 10 minutes or we miss it. Can you make the extraction point?" She looked at him directly. "Yes." He held her gaze for a moment, looking for the gap between what she said and what was true. He didn't find one. "Then we're moving," he said. Hayes was already up. Morales had Barrett on his feet. Rodriguez and Park were at the door. Sandoval had the coordinator on his feet with hands secured. The civilians were standing Cho leaning on the engineer beside him, without complaint from either of them. 14 people, moving toward a dock in a storm that was finally reluctantly giving them something that resembled an opening. Bennett keyed the command frequency. "Trident 1 to Coast Guard extraction. We are moving to the extraction point now. 14 souls, 9 operators, 2 wounded, 5 civilians, 1 detainee. We need a bird in the next 15 minutes." The Coast Guard pilot's voice came back with the easy confidence of a person who had been waiting in a helicopter for 3 hours. "For exactly this call, Trident 1, we have you. We are spinning up. 15 minutes to your position. Have everyone low and away from the rotor arc. We'll do the rest." Claire heard it. She was 3 steps ahead of him, already moving her rifle over her shoulder and her damaged hands at her sides. She did not look back. She just moved toward the extraction point, with the same focused efficiency she had brought to everything else all night. Bennett moved after her, and Hayes, who was the last one through the shelter door, paused in the entrance for 1 second and looked back at the room, at the walls that had held at the floor where Barrett had sat at the north window, where Claire had fired twice and fixed the problem. Then he walked out into the diminishing storm and pulled the door shut behind him. 14 people in the dark, moving together, everyone's feet on the ground, everyone breathing. The dock was 60 meters ahead. The helicopter was 15 minutes out. The storm was losing its grip on the island 1 gust at a time, and Claire Donovan walked beside the men she had spent 56 hours protecting from a mountain ridge, matching their pace without effort, saying nothing, watching everything exactly the same as she had been from the first moment she had been on this island, except that now, for the first time, she was not alone while she did it. The helicopter landed hard and fast the way Coast Guard pilots land, when the weather is still arguing with them and they have made the decision that the argument is over. The rotor wash hit the extraction group like a wall, and everyone leaned into it without being told. Because that was the kind of night it had been, a night where people had stopped and waiting to be told things and had started simply responding to what was in front of them. Barrett went in first, not because he asked to, because Morales pointed at the door, and Barrett for once did not argue. His face had gone the color of old chalk, and his arm had stopped hurting in the specific way that things stop hurting when the body has rerouted the pain budget to other priorities. He climbed in with one arm and sat down and immediately looked back out the door to count the people still on the ground. Old habit, or maybe something more specific to tonight. The civilians went next. Reed helped Cho through the door and then turned back and helped the engineer with the wrapped ankle, and then turned back again for the third, and at no point did she ask anyone else to do it for her. The Coast Guard crew chief was guiding people in with both hands and the focused efficiency of someone who had done this before and was going to do it again correctly, regardless of the conditions. Hayes was the last sealed aboard. He paused at the door the way he had paused at the shelter door 1 second, not more, taking account that only he needed to take. He looked at Bennett. "Where's Donovan?" Bennett turned around. She was standing 6 meters from the helicopter, not moving toward it, standing with her rifle across her chest and her damaged hands at her sides, looking at the aircraft with an expression that Bennett could not fully read in the dark and the rotor wash, but that contained, he thought, something more complicated than reluctance. He walked back to her. He had to lean close to be heard over the rotors. "What are you doing?" he said. "My extraction team is staged at the southern coordinates," she said. "My orders are to hold for assigned extraction. I am not attached to your element." Bennett looked at her for a moment. The wind was still pushing rain sideways across the dock, and the helicopter was burning fuel, and the window was not going to stay open because windows on this island had not stayed open for anything all night. "Donovan," he said, "Commander, your relay tower was damaged. Your transmissions were delayed. You spent 48 hours on a ridge observing a facility that was supposed to hold 12 fighters and held 40. You saved 12 lives tonight and 5 more on top of that." He paused. And right now you are standing in a storm telling me you are going to wait for a different helicopter because those are your assigned orders. She met his eyes. Those are my orders, she said again. But this time there was something in it, not weakness, not doubt, but the specific quality of a person who is saying a true thing and simultaneously knowing that the true thing is not the complete thing. Staff Sergeant Bennett said, and he said it quietly enough that it was just between them. I am the senior officer at this extraction point. I am telling you that you are coming with us. If you want to write that up as a deviation from your assigned extraction protocol, I will sign every piece of paper that comes with it. She looked at him. The rotor wash was moving her hair, and she didn't reach up to fix it. You don't have to do that, she said. I know I don't, he said. Something shifted in her expression. Not a collapse, nothing in Claire Donovan collapsed. He was beginning to understand because the architecture didn't allow for it. But a release of something she had been maintaining that was no longer necessary to maintain. She walked to the helicopter. She climbed in. Hayes moved over to make room without being asked, and she sat down and the crew chief pulled the door and the helicopter lifted off the dock into the diminishing storm. And Claire Donovan looked out the small window at the island falling away below them and said nothing for a long time. Barrett was watching her from across the cabin. He had the look he got when he was working something out. Not staring, just present the way young men look when they are updating their understanding of something they thought they already understood. After 3 minutes of flight, when the island was behind them and the storm was behind them, and the first gray suggestion of dawn is beginning at the eastern edge of the sky, he said, "How long were you up there before we arrived?" Claire looked at him. 48 hours before your insertion. Alone. Alone, Barrett processed that. Did you know it was going to go the way it went? I knew the intelligence was wrong, she said. I knew you were walking into something that didn't match your brief. I did not know that my transmissions were delayed. If I had known that I would have, she stopped, started again differently. I would have found another way to get the information through. You found another way anyway, Barrett said. She looked at him steadily. The emergency frequency was always available. I should have used it sooner. You used it when it mattered, Barrett said. And he said it with the simple authority of someone who was 26 years old and had a hole in his arm and had been in the channel when the charges detonated and knew with the specific certainty of lived experience exactly when it had mattered. Claire held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back out the window. That was the end of that conversation. But it was not the end of what it meant. They landed at the forward operating base on the main island at 0422. The medical team was already on the tarmac. Someone in command had made a correct assumption about what 14 people coming off San Esteban in a storm were likely to need. Barrett was taken immediately not because he was the worst case, but because Morales had spent the last 20 minutes of the flight being increasingly honest with the crew medic about what the arm needed and when it needed it. Hernandez followed. 2 of the engineers who had been assessed as walking wounded turned out to be more significantly affected than the adrenaline of the rescue had allowed them to report, which was a common and entirely understandable phenomenon, and they were taken as well. Reed stood on the tarmac and watched her team go, and then turned to find Bennett standing 4 feet away. What happens now, she said. Debriefing, medical evaluation for all of you, then contact with your families. We'll get you home. She nodded slowly. She had been holding herself together with the compressed precision of someone who knew that the moment she stopped holding everything she had managed not to feel for 4 days was going to arrive at once, and she needed to choose the moment carefully. The woman, Reed said, the sniper. What happens to her? Bennett looked across the tarmac to where Claire was standing with a base medic who was attempting to assess her hands and not entirely succeeding because Claire was allowing the assessment while simultaneously conducting her own inventory of the debrief personnel gathering at the operations building. The base medic looked mildly frustrated. Claire looked like she was managing 2 tasks simultaneously, which she was because that was what Claire Donovan did. That's a good question, Bennett said. He said it quietly because it was a question with an answer he didn't fully control, and that bothered him more than he wanted to show. He left Reed with the logistics officer and crossed the tarmac. The medic stepped back when Bennett arrived, not because Bennett asked, but because the medic had been on enough military installations to recognize the body language of a conversation that needed space. How bad, Bennett said, looking at Claire's hands. Deep abrasions, the medic said before he stepped away. consistent with repeated contact with rough stone surfaces. She needs cleaning and proper dressing. Nothing permanent. I told him that, Claire said, her eyes still on the operations building. Are you counting assets over there? Bennett said. Identifying personnel, she said. Standard practice after a compromised operation. Until the full scope of the intelligence breach is confirmed, I prefer to know who is in the room before I enter it. Bennett looked at the operations building, then back at her. You've been doing this since you landed. Since we were on approach, she said. The tarmac configuration, the personnel positions, the vehicles. She paused. It's not paranoia, it's habit. I know, Bennett said. It's the same habit that kept you alive on that ridge for 2 days. She looked at him then, really looked the way she hadn't fully looked at anyone since the shelter. The assessment gaze dropped, the tactical scanning, pause, just a person looking at another person in the gray light of early morning after a night that neither of them was going to be able to fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. Commander, she said, I violated my observation-only order. Whatever the outcome of tonight was, I need you to understand that I am aware of that. I know you are, Bennett said. I am not looking for absolution. I'm not offering any, he said. I'm offering something different. He met her eyes directly. I'm telling you that I gave you authorization. Those are two separate things, your decision to request it and my decision to grant it. I'm responsible for the second one, fully. She was quiet for a moment. The wind off the landing pad moved between them and then settled. You were protecting your men, she said. So were you, he said, and they weren't even your men. That landed differently than the other things he had said. He could see it in the slight shift of her posture, not a flinch. Nothing that dramatic, but the adjustment of someone who has been reached at a level they weren't covering. No, she said quietly, they weren't. That makes what you did harder, not easier, Bennett said. Anyone will protect their own. You went further. She looked away, back at the operations building. Her jaw was set in the way that people set their jaws when they are deciding not to say something that is close to the surface. Bennett let her have the silence. He had learned enough about her in one night to know that the silence was working. Inside the operations building, the debriefing started at 00:0500. Captain Rebecca Sloan was on a secure video link from Pearl Harbor, composed direct, the kind of officer who had developed the quality of reading rooms through screens and acted on what she read with the same authority she would have used in person. She had been briefed on the core situation during the flight. She knew about the intelligence modification, the delay lay in Claire's transmissions, the ambush, and the outcome. What she did not know yet, what nobody outside the helicopter had known until Bennett's full debrief, was the complete sequence of Claire's decisions from the moment she broke her observation order to the moment she closed the south hatch and took the shot that allowed 12 Americans and 5 civilians to move from a shelter to an extraction point in a dying storm. Bennett gave the complete account, not a summary, the complete account. He spoke for 22 minutes without interruption. He included the radio interceptions, the ventilation shaft information, the maintenance passage from the engineering records, the shot Claire didn't take, because Reed was in the line of fire and the moment Claire stayed in the weather station when she could have run. When he finished, Sloan looked at him through the screen for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "Where is Staff Sergeant Donovan now?" "She is in this building," Bennett said. "Bring her in." Claire came in and stood in front of the screen with the posture of someone who has made a decision about how they are going to conduct themselves in an environment like this and is conducting themselves that way. Straight, present, not performing confidence, and not performing contrition. Sloan looked at her for a long moment. "Staff Sergeant," she said, "I have read your operational history. I reviewed it when you were assigned to Task Force Meridian. Do you know what I thought when I read it?" Claire said, "No, ma'am. I thought you were exactly the kind of operator we need in isolated territory reconnaissance. Precise, self-sufficient, disciplined enough to hold a position when every instinct says to move." Sloan paused. "I also noted that you had been flagged twice in your career for the same category of issue, exceeding your assigned operational parameters when you assessed that the situation required it." Claire did not respond. The silence was its own kind of response. "You want to tell me what happened last night?" Sloan said. Claire looked at the screen steadily. "I understood my order, ma'am. I also understood what would happen if I obeyed it. I made a choice and I stand behind it. You don't intend to argue that the communications delay absolved you?" "No, ma'am. The delay changed the timeline. It did not change the order." Sloan was quiet for 3 seconds. That is either the most honest answer I have heard in 20 years of command or the most calculated one. It's honest, Claire said, and she said it without any particular emphasis, the way people say true things that don't need emphasis because the truth carries its own weight. Sloan looked at Bennett, then back at Claire, then at the documentation in front of her. Bennett's debrief, the transmission logs, the routing metadata, from the compromise brief, the engineering records Claire had sourced for the maintenance passage and the ventilation shaft. The investigation into the intelligence modification is active, Sloan said. The officer at Pearl Harbor has been formally detained pending full review. Your transmission logs have been recovered from the relay station backup. 3 of your 6 updates, including the corrected enemy strength estimate, are confirmed as sent and undelivered due to the damaged relay. The 4th and 5th were received and actioned correctly. The 6th was the emergency frequency transmission that Commander Bennett received in the channel. Oh, she paused. You did not fail to report, Staff Sergeant. Your reports were failed by the system that was supposed to carry them. Something moved through the room. Bennett felt it. Hayes, standing behind him, felt it. Even the debrief officer at the far end of the table, who had been maintaining professional neutrality with the effort of someone holding a door against a strong wind, felt it. Claire's expression did not change significantly, but something behind it did. Something small and deep that had been braced against the weight of accountability and was now adjusting to the slightly different weight of being told that the accountability was not entirely where she had put it. I still broke the order, she said, quietly, not defensively. Yes, Sloan said, you did. And we are going to have a complete formal review of the decision framework governing field observers in isolated territory operations. Because what last night revealed is that we gave you a rule without giving you adequate authority to operate within the reality the rule was supposed to address. A pause. That is not your failure. That is ours. The debrief continued for another hour and 40 minutes. Technical specifics, timeline reconstruction, intelligence, architecture, the coordinator's identity, and the network connections that the drive and his detention had opened for analysis. It was thorough and necessary and professionally conducted, and Claire answered every question with the same precise factual completeness she had applied to everything else. When it was over, Bennett found her in the corridor outside the debrief room, sitting on a bench with her newly dressed hands resting on her knees and her eyes on the middle distance. The medic had done a proper job, clean white dressings on both hands, symmetric neat. She was looking at them with the expression of someone who is still slightly surprised that their hands look the way they do. Barrett appeared around the corner with his arm in a proper sling and a cup of coffee in his other hand. He held it out to Claire without preamble. She looked at it, then at him, then took it. How's the arm, she said. Hurts now, he said. Morales says that means it's healing. Morales is right. Barrett leaned against the wall. They're saying the Joint Overwatch program changes are going to start with your debrief data. I heard, she said. You going to be part of it? She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and looked at it. I don't know yet. You should be, he said, simply, the way 26-year-olds say things that they believe completely and have not yet learned to qualify. She looked at him. You're very confident for someone who spent half the night on a tunnel floor. I had good cover, he said. She almost smiled. It was the closest she had come all night, and Barrett noticed and did not say anything about it, which was the right call. Bennett came to stand in front of her. Hayes was behind him. Park and Rodriguez behind Hayes. Sandoval at the far end, the whole element minus the 2 still in medical. She looked at them. There's something we want to show you, Bennett said. If you're willing. She looked at his expression. She was very good at reading expressions by now. She did not know what was coming, but she understood that it was not procedural. She stood up. They took her to a room at the back of the operations building that was not on any standard map of the facility. The door was not marked. Bennett opened it with a key card that he kept on a separate ring from his standard credentials, and inside the room was a wall, and on the wall were photographs and names, and in some cases, personal objects. A watch, a folded letter, a single challenge coin mounted under glass. The memorial room, the private one, not the official memorial in the main corridor with its brass plaques and its formal language. This one, where Trident I put the people they had worked alongside who had not come home from places like San Esteban. Claire stood in front of the wall and looked at it for a long time. Bennett stood beside her. "We put people up here who we would have come back for," he said quietly. "Regardless of assignment, regardless of chain of command, people who were in the fight with us when it counted." He let that sit for a moment. "Last night changed something for me," he said. "I spent 15 years believing that good leadership meant controlling every resource in the plan, knowing where every asset was and what it was authorized to do, and not accepting help that didn't fit the framework." He paused. "San Esteban taught me that the most important voice in a crisis is sometimes the one that doesn't fit the framework, that recognizing it and trusting it is its own kind of leadership." Hayes spoke from behind them. His voice was quieter than usual, but carried the specific weight of a man who chooses his words carefully and had been choosing these particular ones for a while. "You know what the difference was between the first time you spoke on that radio and the last time," Hayes said. Claire turned slightly. "The first time you were a voice," Hayes said. "By the time we were in the shelter, you were ours." The room was very quiet. Claire looked at the wall for another long moment, at the photographs and the names and the objects left by people who understood what it meant to not be left behind. Then she turned to face them. All of them. 7 men standing in a room they had carried their losses into, looking at her with the expression that people wear when they have decided something and are waiting to see if the person they have decided it about understands what they are being offered. She understood. No. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," she said. And she meant it the way she meant everything, completely without performance. "We know," Bennett said. "Heroes try to be heroes. You were just trying to bring us home." She looked at him, then at Hayes, then at Barrett with his sling and his coffee and his 26-year-old certainty that things should be what they should be. She said, "You came back for me." "We told you we would," Bennett said. "People say things in the dark," she said. "We meant it in the dark," Hayes said. "We meant it in the light too." She nodded once. Kind of nod that means more than nodding. The kind that means a person has received something they did not know they had been carrying the absence of until the moment it arrived. 3 weeks later, the joint overwatch protocol that came out of the San Esteban debrief changed the standing orders for field observers in isolated territory operations. The new framework gave them a defined intervention authority threshold, specific conditions under which observation-only designation could be converted to active support without requiring a command authorization chain that the events of that night had proven could be compromised. The language in the new protocol was drafted by a working group that included Bennett, Hayes, and a reconnaissance specialist whose operational history had been reviewed by Captain Sloan before she was assigned to Task Force Meridian. The working group met 6 times over 3 weeks. At the 5th meeting, Bennett asked Claire to describe the moment she had decided to break the observation order. Not for the protocol, for the record. For the document that would sit behind the protocol and tell the people who came after them why the rule had been changed. She thought about it for a moment. The way she thought about everything fully without rushing. "I looked it through the scope," she said, "and I saw 12 men who were going to die in the next 8 minutes, and I understood that I was the only variable in the situation that could change that outcome. The order said to stay concealed. The order was written for a situation where my concealment served the mission's larger purpose." She paused. In that moment, the larger purpose and the immediate reality had separated completely. "I chose the immediate reality." Bennett wrote that down. He wrote it word for word. Months later, when the joint program ran its first combined exercise, SEALs, Army Reconnaissance, Coast Guard Tactical, and a young operator on the beach heard a woman's voice through his earpiece, providing overwatch data with the specific, unhurried precision of someone who had been watching the terrain long before he arrived. He asked his team leader who it was. Hayes answered. He was the team leader. He had requested the assignment specifically. "That's Donovan," Hayes said. "If she says there's danger, believe her before you look. If she says she has your back, keep moving and don't look back." The young operator looked at the ridge where the voice was coming from. He couldn't see anything. No position, no movement, no indication that anyone was up there at all. "How will I know if she's still there?" he asked. Hayes almost smiled. "You won't," he said. "That's the point." And on the ridge, 300 meters above a training beach, on a clear morning with good visibility and no storm and no 40 fighters and no compromised intelligence chain, Claire Donovan settled behind her scope and found the training element and began counting heads the way she always did. 1, 2, 3, all the way to the last man, everyone present, everyone accounted for. She exhaled slowly through her nose and got back to work.